Before we start the show tonight, just a reminder that Isaac and I will be hosting Gundam Trivia at Anime Expo Chibi 2024 on Sunday, November 10th at 1:30 p.m. in Ballroom A of the Ontario Convention Center in Ontario, California. If you're in the area, grab some tickets to the con and come test your Gundam knowledge with us. If you're not in the area but want to submit a question, go ahead and leave a comment on this episode or any episode and we'll try to work it in. And with that, let's get to the Coordinator Deep Dive. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of Colony Drop, a Gundam podcast. My name is Brian.
And my name is Isaac. This is your favorite Gundam podcast where we talk about anything and everything that's related to Gundam. Whether that's anime series or movies, Gundam music, like the intros or outros, the models, Gunpla, ideas, lore, you name it. If it's Gundam related, we talk about it here. Isn't that right, Brian?
That is correct, Isaac. And today we have something we haven't done in a while, which is like a informational lore episode, a deep dive.
Yeah, this is something that I personally feel the show didn't do well enough because we still have questions. Hence why we decided, you know what, this would make for a great episode since we have such a surface level of information that's presented to us in the show about this topic. And what is the topic, Ryan?
The topic is coordinators.
Yes.
Those enhanced humans, Isaac.
Yeah. Do you kind of agree with me, though, that Seed never really went into detail about coordinators? Like, were you watching it and you were kind of like, well, I sort of know what they are?
Wow, you're like jumping to the conclusion here, Isaac. But yeah,
okay.
I feel like Seed, Destiny, and Freedom sort of scratched the surface to something that probably should have been the show's strength. And I feel like maybe at the end of the day, if you look back, they kind of squandered some opportunities. I think the side story called Astray, which we've never read, it's a manga, there's several different manga series. I think they actually did some more interesting things with coordinators than the actual animated works did. So I have a whole section of my notes, Isaac, called like mistakes were made, and this is where I talk about where they didn't do enough with coordinators.
Okay, wonderful. I've also created some lengthy notes, but what you just pointed out right now that, Astray goes into them in detail, that's such a damning fact that you needed a manga to answer the questions you realize you didn't answer in the original series. They already lost some points there for starting off on the bad foot, I believe. And I hope the listeners agree with us that as far as we're concerned, coordinators are genetically enhanced or changed individuals. That's about it. That's about the extent that Seed told us about them, right?
Kinda, yeah. I mean, there's not a whole lot more to go on. I mean, we can look at things they're known for and that kind of thing.
Okay.
But I do agree with you that I think it's one thing if your show is like 13 episodes, or maybe even 26, right? So, for example, if we compare it to Witch only had 26 episodes, and we felt Witch didn't do enough, right? On its background information as well. But here for Seed, if you look at Seed, you look at Destiny, you look at Freedom, you got 100 episodes in a movie, and I still feel like we don't have enough answers. I mean, if you get 100 episodes, I feel like you got to give us all the answers, Isaac.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's a lot of TV.
You took the words right out of my mouth. I wanted my handheld because we're in such a new setting as in the cosmic era, and instead it was very hand waved, and it's almost as if in the pitch room the brainstorming was like, well, what if there was a whole nation or faction of just new types? You know. It was like, well, how would that happen? Oh, they were all genetically engineered. It was like, okay, but that's a one-sentence explanation for why things are the way they are.
Yeah, exactly.
So let's deep dive into it, Brian. For my research, I decided to use the good old Gundam Wiki.
Yeah, that's about the best English source available. Now, that's not to say I know that there's a lot of things on the Gundam Wiki that perhaps are not exactly accurate, but I think probably for the stuff that we will discuss tonight, it was fairly accurate. So
yeah, and what's great about the Gundam Wiki, though, is it opens with a bit of dialogue between two characters that has so much information in it. I'm going to read the quote. This is from Kira and Kigali. They're having a discussion. Kira says, "The coordinators are no different from anyone else." And Kigali says, "But you guys could do so much more than we can, from birth." And Kira replies, "Only if we practice, study, or train properly. We're not born with special abilities just because we're coordinators." And Kigali says, "I guess you're right." And Kira closes out by saying, "It's true that we don't catch deadly diseases, and we're born after our genes are operated on to alter our potential abilities and physical features. But I understand those to be naturals or everyone's dream. That's why we exist." Okay, so Kira put a ton of information, the show put a ton of information just in that dialogue bit. Because by saying they don't catch deadly diseases, does he mean that, like, virally, they can't catch certain viruses or most bad viruses? Or does he mean, like, any diseases, like, some type of Parkinson's or Alzheimer's or a cancer that almost seems like, it's a random event at times,
I agree. I don't think they made a distinction, and I don't know that they meant to. I had the same question, like, does that protect them from viruses, from cancer, from HIV, from other types of things? I think they purposely leave it vague because they don't seem to want to explore it.
Okay, that's not good.
I actually copied that exact same quote into my first mistakes were made because I felt like they started out on this coordinator versus natural path, but you can't really tell the difference between the two, and it kind of just devolves into space versus Earth, which is a bit of a retread. And I think that's a mistake. I think they should have leaned more into the coordinators and the naturals being something other than space versus Earth.
I absolutely agree. It wasn't leaned into enough for as massive of a difference it is, as interesting of a concept it is.
Right.
Not to geek out, but I feel like Blade Runner is very much taking sort of similar themes and then executing them flawlessly in terms of, okay, there's regular humans, and then there's also these sort of engineered beings that look like humans that are kind of treated wholly differently. Gundam kind of took that, but like it's so murky as far as what's fact and what's kind of just, speculation. This whole disease part, like it kind of really opened up the window for them to have a plot element, maybe even in the movie, where Blue Cosmos was working on a virus or something that they know would affect coordinators because of their genes. I call it Corvid-19.
That's fantastic.
If they make more Seed movies, please have Blue Cosmos up to no good doing something like that.
That is way better than the plot in Freedom. I'll say that right now.
We're going to get to Freedom. My thoughts on some of that interacts with this. But there was a lot of information that Kira said there. The disease part's very interesting because they're almost superhuman if they're not able to catch any sickness. That's so interesting, unique. There must be so few coordinator hospitals.
Oh, that's a good point. Yeah, maybe they just don't have a need for such a huge facility because hospitals in the real world are enormous.
Right, yeah.
So you're right. I think it is pretty vague.
Uh-huh.
We should probably talk about what we know about them.
Sure.
So as you said, simplest way to explain it is they are genetically enhanced humans from the cosmic era. So that would be Seed, Destiny, Freedom, Astray, Stargazer, any other Seed adjacent media you want to entertain. I think what's important here is typically is an important word, they're modified as an embryo and they're put back into the mother where they are then born.
That's so interesting. So initially in Seed, watching and stuff, before even doing the research for this episode, I thought that, the embryo stays in the mother and then they just kind of, start injecting stuff here and there,
Yeah. While they're in
like
there.
Like an oil change or something, they... However they're doing it, big needles, I don't know.
Yeah.
But the idea that they kind of, I don't know how, they open her up or they go through the main entrance and then they take out the embryo and slap it inside of a tank, do whatever editing, and then take it back out and slap it back into the mom. I had no idea it was working like that. Did you?
First, I have to say that would be a really good tattoo, main entrance with an arrow. But I'm sure they addressed it probably lightly in the show. I don't recall. I mean, I think you can kind of infer the way they do it through what they do tell you about the Ultimate Coordinator project. We'll probably get to a little bit later.
Yeah.
But I have had some friends kind of do the whole in vitro fertilization, so I kind of heard how that works. And so I kind of assume it works like that. Like they take, the sperm, they take the egg, they do it all outside, create an embryo, and then when that embryo is ready, they work on it, and then they put it in the mother. So I don't think they're actually going in the main entrance after it's been fertilized, taking it out, working on it, putting it back in. I would assume it would be easier to create the embryo outside, make sure it's viable, then they put it back in once they've done their fixing.
Well, actually, no. The wiki says they take the embryo out. It has to be done in its early stages. Yeah, it starts in the mother, and then in early stages, they take it out and do the actual process with the whatever genes they want.
Well, see, that seems inefficient then, because you can make the embryo outside the mother. You don't have to do that. I mean, we do that today
Yeah.
If you're listening to this, a lot of your employers probably cover it as part of their insurance. So it's expensive, but it is doable.
I gotta go by by the wiki, and it says this has to be done in the earliest stages of embryonic development, which means that there's a window. So there's essentially a coordinator window. After that window closes, maybe the genes don't take, or the baby just, the embryo the embryo's in trouble if you try fixing it after a certain point.
It doesn't work out,
How interesting.
So we are told, Isaac, that the enhanced traits are typically, and these could be significant or insignificant. You may end up with a guy that just has blue hair or something. Maybe that's the only thing that was changed about this person. But they're typically physically faster, stronger, resistant to disease and illness, smarter, more adept at learning, think faster, spatial awareness. Basically, they have more processing power, so to speak.
Okay, so we're told.
Now, I would argue, allegedly. But I would argue that those sort of differences kind of whittle away as the show goes on, right? I mean, I would say it's a big difference in the beginning of Seed until Kira reprograms the OS for the Orb mobile suits.
Sure.
And then from then on, they kind of just fight on even terms for the most part.
Yeah. If the coordinators are supposed to be more intelligent, stronger, and faster than average humans, why haven't the plants won? Let's even go to essentially what is the peak technology of each side, which is the super weapons, right? So the natural super weapons, you challenge me on this or agree with me, please, are just as, if not more effective than the coordinator super weapons.
I think you're right on that. And I think that might be because I feel like, as maybe we'll explore a bit when we talk about combat coordinators, but the naturals seem to have a bigger desire to make super weapons. Because I feel like they felt threatened more than the coordinators did.
Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know. Because they built... Hang on. The coordinators built Genesis, turned it into a weapon. They built Neo Genesis, and then afterwards they took Requiem and did it again in Freedom. So I'm not... I wouldn't say that only the naturals feel threatened. There's clearly a sense of feeling threatened on both sides.
I'm not saying they don't feel threatened. Yeah. I'm just saying that if you're going to bet on who's going to build a more psychotic super weapon, I'm betting on Blue Cosmos every time.
Yeah, you got me there. But that kind of just proves my point, though, that look what the naturals are able to achieve. Sure. How come the coordinators haven't, been able to one-up them and make the super weapon and shield? It's like, well, you guys are so smart, but I feel like there's almost a disconnect between the marketing of what these parents were told would happen to their children, and then the actual end result of, well, he can run a little faster, he can run a few seconds faster, maybe he's a little stronger, he doesn't catch the cold, sometimes he likes math, but I mean, the other natural kids in the classroom, if they just study for an extra 20 minutes, they're essentially the same thing.
That's an interesting point you bring up, and I think that kind of leads us into the other maybe thing that they kind of dropped a bit, which was the issue of infertility or non-viability as you go down the coordinator generation.
Right, generation 3.
Yeah, so there's this concept of generations of coordinators. The first generation is defined as a natural child modified into a coordinator. So that's the first time you take the embryo, you modify it, you get a coordinator. So that coordinator is now a first generation coordinator. The second generation is a child of two coordinators. So that means that first generation has no problems mating, breeding, with whatever you want to call it, with another going through the main entrance with another coordinator and having a baby, no problem.
Sure.
But if that second generation coordinator tries to have a baby, they didn't clearly define this, but if they try to breed with another, I would assume, coordinator, or definitely second generation coordinator, they start to have some issues. It doesn't mean that it won't work, but it seems like there's less chance of it working.
Yes.
I feel like the show kind of misled us a little bit, and I walked away thinking after a while they just become completely infertile, and I don't think that's exactly the point. I think the point was they can still do it, but the whole point of coordinators was that they at some point would need to go mate with the overall natural human population so that their modified traits would eventually spread and benefit humanity. But they don't seem to be doing that. They're all just sitting in the plants going into the main entrance with each other, and it's just not working out on the third generation.
Like rabbits locked in an apartment.
Yeah, they're just like those old cartoons where the rabbits just, slowly bulge out of the room. And
I'm glad that you bring this up, because in my reading on the same entry on the wiki, It explains that this is something the show completely glossed over. Part of the conflict in the plants between the Klein faction, which, as you know, listeners, was Lacus's dad, or Lacus's dad, Siegel Klein, and the Zala faction, Patrick Zala, was Klein was pro mixing and
Yes.
having half coordinators. That's the obvious, immediate solution. Just, I don't know.
Just open the door, baby. Just
Yeah, I was about to say. Is his plan like the world's first pro-sexual immigration?
Yeah.
We're like, hey, are you single?
I mean, I did read, I don't know if this is true. Someone would obviously have to ask Fukuda-san. But I did read that it was at least a bit of a commentary on Japan's declining birth rate. And it's still declining. It's not doing well. And so,
No.
you do get those ads, and I'm not sure if those ads are true. We can debate the merit of those ads, but, they're essentially giving, people make fun of it and call it their, like, breeding visas to go over there and help, the Japanese birth rate. So, yeah, I mean, that is the most obvious solution, but as you said, Mr. Zala, he wasn't having that.
No. Zala's approach was it was very coordinator. His approach was instead that they should double down on genetic technology and throw funding at research to see what kind of solution they can make to their fertility problem. Which, I mean, that also sounds pretty practical. I'm surprised they didn't make some kind of agreement and say, like, look, why don't we just do both at the same time? But
agreed. Well, then your show's over in 20 minutes, so you can't.
Can you imagine if people agreed?
Right.
Or cooperated in real life? Oh.
No Gundam was ever made, and the show is over.
Zeon and the Federation settled their differences peacefully.
They kissed and made up, and then that was it.
So yes, back to the fertility issue. I don't know if George Glenn was aware of this. I assume not, since he was a Generation 1. But man, what a horrible pitfall for your whole nation you built on this idea of editing genes. It was bad enough that I think I read Siegel Klein's sort of stopgap solution was essentially I want to say a wedding registry where people's information would be retained by the government, their genetic information. That way, if you kind of came forward to the government and said, hey, we need a marriage license, we're going to get married, the government would say, okay, the genes would work. Or the government might say, you better pump your brakes because
right.
It does not look like you guys will be able to have a birth no matter what you do.
Yeah, libertarians are not a fan of this policy. They want to keep the government out of your bedroom, but the government was definitely in your bedroom here if you were living in the plants.
Yeah.
So this brings up a great point,
okay.
One thing I did that was on the wiki, I combined a lot of the things on the wiki and I created a timeline. Specifically because I was confused a little bit on the plan you're talking about, where the government was, I don't want to say arranging the marriages, but they were strong-arming you into yes or no. And I learned a few things by pasting the whole timeline together, and I have a lot of questions now as a result. So I'm going to go through the timeline real quick here, and then hopefully that's going to illuminate some of my questions. So
okay.
Prior to the cosmic era starting, some geneticists enhance a human named George Glenn, who you mentioned. He is the first coordinator. In Cosmic Era 15, he comes out after just making all sorts of great achievements in his life, and he announces himself that he is the first coordinator. Isaac, this dude was a Olympic gold medalist. He was an ace pilot in the Air Force. He was an aerospace engineer. And then, by the way, he built his own spaceship to go explore Jupiter, where he discovered the first evidence of alien life called Evidence 1, which is the winged whale fossil. Isaac, this dude, he's more impressive than pretty much everyone except Kira, all of the coordinators born after him.
I'd say he's even more impressive than Kira.
Yeah, because he was doing it 70 years before Kira, so...
I know there's a lot of Kira fans listening, but let's face it, Kira is just the best pilot of a weapon in the Earth sphere. That's it. That's really all Kira is. He's not a scientist. He's not a pioneer, an Olympian, nothing like that. He's very good at using a vehicle at the end of the day. That's it.
Yeah, George Glenn, he's a leader.
Yeah.
I don't know that Kira has all those capabilities, but...
If we haven't seen it, it hasn't happened. There you go.
So George leaves for Jupiter.
Sure.
By the way, in Astray, I don't know, did you read about this? Again, I've never read Astray, but now I kind of want to because it's a little bit more interesting, I think, than the actual show.
It's on our list, yeah.
Yeah. His brain ended up getting preserved in a device called the GG unit, which obviously stands for George Glenn.
Of course.
And it was then integrated into the computer of the ship known as the Rehome, which I believe is the ship in Astray. It's like not the white base, but the analogous white base, and it becomes an AI that serves as the ship's captain. So George Glenn is essentially the ship's captain, or at least an AI based on his brain.
Wow.
And during the series, Isaac, he apparently, spoilers, reveals that he believes and tell me if you've ever heard this before. George Glenn's brain's AI reveals he believes the coordinator's true purpose is to coordinate the next step of humanity's evolution, which is also the plot of Gundam 00, the innovators and the innovates. So he dreamed big, I guess. But anyway, in Cosmic Era 24, and the reason I'm mentioning dates here is because I was very confused after watching Freedom. And when I went back and looked at the dates, it was telling me some things, and I want to get your opinion on them. So in Cosmic Era 24 and Cosmic Era 25, Ulen Hibiki is born, and then Queen Aura Maha Kyber is born.
Oh boy.
In Cosmic Era 29, George returns from Jupiter with Evidence 1. Cosmic Era 30, they lift the ban on creating coordinators. So when George came out and said, hey, I'm a coordinator, shortly, if not immediately after, creation of coordinators was banned. You just couldn't do it. It doesn't mean it didn't happen, because Patrick Zala and Siegel Klein are also first-gen coordinators, just like George Glenn, but they were born in Cosmic Era 22 and 23, while the ban was in effect.
Wow.
However, I don't believe we know anything about who created them or who created any first-gen coordinators illegally.
Well,
I believe that early coordinator black market, Isaac, is ripe for exploration. If I'm a Cosmic Era fan, I want a story about that.
Right. The lore says George Glenn, after his announcement, he released how to actually make a coordinator, right? The full steps.
Oh, did it? Yeah.
Yeah. So I assume at that point there were certain parents who believed they were doing the best for their child, and they were able to find sympathetic doctors or scientists that said, look, we have the steps, we have the money, can we do it? Do you want to do it? And then everybody said yes, and that was it.
But my point is, the plot to assassinate Giran that we just read from Universal Century that added all that lore about the beginning of the Universal Century and the beginning of Xeon.
Right.
You could do the equivalent story here.
Yeah.
About who were the people that set out to make all these coordinators. They didn't have to. They were presumably naturals.
Yeah, they had to be. All coordinators came from naturals. Yeah.
Exactly.
So it was people that were passionate about it, believed in it, maybe even looked up to George Glenn, or just wanted the best for their offspring and believed this was the best choice.
You could even put him behind the whole thing.
Oh, George Glenn?
Yeah.
Oh, like he funded the first batch. Oh, wow. He was the happy anonymous charity contributor.
There you go.
Wow. That'd be great.
I'm just saying that's a weird thing to not be filled in.
Yeah.
Like no one's rushing to do that side story. And maybe it's not visually impressive because there's no mobile suits, but there could at least be like a novel about it or something in a source book.
Right, yeah.
I think that would be interesting. If I was a big Cosmic Era fan, I would want to read about that.
Sure, yeah. Is there more in the timeline after the Klein and Zala?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Oh, yeah. So here we go. So CE30, the ban is lifted, and the coordinator boom happens.
Uh-huh.
But also, Isaac, this is when some social unrest begins with some anti-coordinator sentiments. Okay? Now, the next event is what started to confuse me. Cosmic Era 41, Gilbert Durandal is born.
Oh, okay.
Okay, that's a full 17 years after Ulen Hibiki and after Queen Aura Maha Kyber.
Okay.
Okay, there's a big age difference there.
Yeah.
CE45, the Proto-Earth Alliance creates combat coordinators. It's basically coordinators focused on fighting.
Sure.
With an eye toward taking on the plants one day. They're getting a little nervous. They're like, I don't know about these plants, and they're coordinators. Maybe we need our own. But funnily enough, Isaac, they eventually shut down the combat coordinator program once Blue Cosmos gets in power, because Blue Cosmos is like, whoa, what do you mean you were making our own coordinators? We hate those things. Turn that thing off. And instead, they replace it with the biological CPU program, which is basically the extended, the messed up humans. I feel like it's not very efficient, Isaac. I feel like it would have been easier to just keep the coordinators.
No, this is Blue Cosmos. Like they will, as we saw in the, they gunned down George Glenn. They've gunned down like other coordinators in public. So nothing's really gonna change their approach, even if to their own benefit to use coordinators. So they'd rather just completely remove them from existence.
Yeah, so if nothing else, you can at least say Blue Cosmos walks the walk, right? Like they back up what they're spewing. I didn't know anything about combat coordinators, Isaac, before reading about them, but they do appear in the Seed Astray manga.
Well, we'll find out.
Apparently, Isaac, they wanted them to be submissive and to not harm naturals, but I guess that didn't work out in the original ones. I think they were named Guy and Good. They escaped. But they eventually figured out how to make them submissive, and so they cloned the one guy, Good, several times. But yeah, I thought that was really funny that Blue Cosmos actually did shut it down when they got in power. I thought that was remarkably consistent of them.
Yeah, good for them.
I was like, well, at least Isaac's people have principles, and they stand by them. Okay, this is where the meat of the issue becomes. Around CE 46 through the CE 50s, the Ultimate Coordinator project is undertaken by Dr. Ulen Hibiki and funded by Al DeFlaga to create the Ultimate Coordinator via an artificial external womb to remove the problems associated with a natural birth by better controlling fetus development. And then a lot of stuff happens at the same time. The Coordinator boom ends. Blue Cosmos, they start to gain influence in the Atlantic Federation. And this is where coordinators start to migrate entirely to the planets or orb. That becomes our issue, where we're really just space versus Earth again instead of interesting things about coordinators. Also in the 50s, that's, Isaac, when the plants institute the marriage control system, whereby the government only permits breeding compatible coordinators to marry each other. And, Isaac, I didn't realize this. Now, looking back, I'm an idiot, because I believe it was covered in one of the recap episodes in Destiny, which I probably didn't watch or fell asleep during. But that's why Durandal and Talia broke up. They were not compatible.
Ah, okay. Well.
But once they broke up, she went and had a kid with someone else, and then she came back to him once I think her husband, I can't remember if he passed away or not, but obviously, she loved the D being Durandal too much to stay away. So she came back, obviously, as we saw during the show. But looking back, why didn't they make that a bigger deal of that in the show?
Yeah, totally glossed over.
Apparently, it's like a throwaway line in one of the recap episodes.
God.
That should have been front and center.
Okay. Wow.
So then, also in the CE 50s, another big thing. This is when Queen Aura, Ulen Hibiki, and Gilbert Durandal all meet each other while at the Mendel colony doing their research. Aura wants to create a species that surpasses coordinators to implement and lead Durandal's destiny plan. So when you watch Freedom, you get the sense that Durandal is like a contemporary of Queen Aura because they were friends and all this. She's way older than him.
Yeah, and that weird unexplained age
reversal,
whatever that was.
Yes. So that's getting to one of my big conspiracy theories here, okay? So then also in the CE 50s, Siegel Klein meets Lacus's mother, who still does not have a name. CE 53, George Glenn is assassinated by a jealous natural. CE 55, Kira Yamato and Lacus Klein are born. Lacus, excuse me. CE 58, Lacus's mother mysteriously dies, Isaac.
Interesting.
No information. She's just dead.
Whoever she was.
CE 71, that's when the conflict in Zaf between Siegel and Patrick begins. Now, several things there, Isaac. The CE 50s they're too ill-defined. We need some clarity there. And it also presents an opportunity for the Cosmic Era going forward.
Sure.
If I'm reading this timeline right, Durandal created the Destiny Plan when he was 19 tops.
Well, he's got a big brain, right? Genetically engineered big brain.
I guess so. But when you were 19, what were you doing, Isaac?
Probably playing some type of first-person shooter game.
Exactly. And then if we look at the ages, again, if you watch Freedom, I feel like Durandal comes off as a contemporary friend of Queen Aura and Hibiki, because we know that Hibiki and Aura were sort of in competition. Hibiki wanted to make Ultimate Coordinator his way, and Queen Aura wanted to make it her way. And then we got the Accords, which we haven't talked about. But Aura and Hibiki are roughly the same age. They're 1 year apart. Durandal is 16, 17 years younger than them. He must have been their intern, Isaac.
Probably. I wouldn't be surprised.
That makes way more sense.
Yeah.
And then there's a note in the wiki, which I don't know where they got this, but it says, Aura used the Klein's genetics to create Lacus. I don't buy it, Isaac. I think someday that they will reveal that she used Durandal's genes and Lacus's mother to create Lacus. Or,
interesting,
potentially that Lacus's mother is not really dead. She could be the next big villain.
Where is she?
I don't know.
Oh, God. I'd buy that.
It also has vague things like Durandal helped Queen Aura become head of Foundation. It's just like fiated into existence. So it's either poor story planning or they have something else that they would like to say. And then, going back to the picture that was in Freedom that shows Lacus's mother alongside Aura, because we're told that her mother, they were friends and that she was also working on the genetic thing.
Sure.
Presumably on the Accords. Did Aura experiment on herself after she was born, obviously, because she's experimenting on herself, and that's what caused her to shrink? Like one of the coordinators that's maybe where the genetic thing doesn't work the way it's supposed to? Because there are examples, in Astray, for example, there's this girl named Rika Shada, I think. She's a coordinator that's born very short and basically blind. Like whatever they tried to do to her didn't really work out, and it had unintended consequences. And she ends up having to use these like electric visors or glasses to see, basically, and be a pilot.
Very Star Trek.
Yeah, maybe Queen Aura got so into it that she started experimenting on herself, because I still feel like she looks like a normal sized person in that picture with Lakusa's mother, or that means Lakusa's mother is also the size of Queen Aura. Which one is more likely, Isaac?
They're both little.
I don't know. I still don't get it.
No.
So yeah, that's my big takeaway from putting together the timeline. I did not realize that Durandal was so much younger, yet played such a big role with like the Destiny plan, the Accords, and all this stuff. It just doesn't make sense to me. I feel like we need some clarity there.
Yeah, and I doubt we'll actually get any. Ironically, if they do dive into that, a lot of the questions we might have here about coordinators might get answered.
Yeah, I would hope so, right?
Oh, okay. Something interesting that Kira says is we're born after our genes are operated on to alter our potential abilities and physical features. Brian, what is a potential ability? What does potential abilities entail? Because in my opinion, that's almost like saying nothing. Anybody has potential abilities for almost anything if they like put in the time and effort to actually learn it, you know?
I agree. It's too vague. I think it's a little bit of like Gundam Wing speak.
Yeah.
Right? Where they're just throwing out potentials and vagaries, and you're just like, yeah, that sounds good. Like, let's say that. Let's put that in there. But I guess he means, you know, if your IQ was higher, would you invent something very useful?
Yeah.
Or if your physical ability was a little bit better, would you become a great athlete? That's kind of how I took it.
It's interesting that character that you mentioned had gone through the coordinator process and still didn't come out as desired.
Yeah.
So this process isn't as foolproof as they make it say. I imagine there's plenty of coordinators walking around who, knowingly or unknowingly, probably have differences than what their original parents wanted.
Oh, agreed. Yeah, and I think that's
Yeah.
maybe another mistake that the show made, was that they didn't show us more mistakes like that girl.
Yeah. Getting back to what Kira said about to alter our potential abilities and physical features. Have you heard the term designer baby?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Okay, so for listeners that don't know, designer baby is kind of a hypothetical term / sci-fi term about eventually we'll get to genetic technology where parents can get together and before the baby's even born kind of decide physical features, how they want it to look, how tall should the baby be, what kind of hair should it have, how should the skin tone be, eye color, facial structure, things like that. Brian, based on what Kira said about altering physical features, are coordinators really designer babies?
I think they are to some extent. Yeah, absolutely.
Wow. So the parents are like the coordinator parents or natural parents that are pro coordinator. They're pretty much sitting down with like a tablet and saying, all right, well, this is going to be Bobby Jr. and he's going to be 6'1" and this will be his hair color and eye color and wow.
Oh, absolutely. And I don't know if this is intentional, but I'm going to read into it that it is intentional.
Sure.
All of the best coordinators that we see in the show come from very well-off families.
Interesting.
So they're the ones that have the most money to do the most modification.
Ironically, I think Azrael and Jabril are like might have more money than the plants combined.
They have principles, Isaac. They can't go down that path.
They actually look like pretty decent looking people themselves.
Right.
They're not deformed or anything. I
No.
mean, well, you could say they have deformed morality. But wow, how interesting that everyone walking around the coordinators is essentially their parents' idea of what a good-looking person should look like.
Well, and yeah, we also don't know, like, if you just modify someone to be 6 foot tall, right? Like,
Right.
So if you think about the real world, what would people change? Height and we'll say metabolism or something would be the most popular things, right? Right away.
Maybe some general fitness.
Yeah.
I can absolutely see parents wanting control over the most easiest of choices, the most customizable thing, which would be like eye color and hair color. That has to be like the top of the list, right, with height, you know?
Yeah, because there's certain things that society would change, right? Doctors would go in and say, okay, well, we're going to eliminate susceptibility to disease, cancer, viruses, etc. Because I don't even consider that to be like a designer baby. But to your point, designer baby, that's when you get into if they can be 6'3" instead of 6'1", I'd prefer them to be 6'3". And I don't know that the genes work exactly that way. You know, I don't think it's quite that simple.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to go ahead and say it. You don't exactly see a ton of coordinators that don't have fair skin.
Yeah.
As opposed to the population of Earth, which is, say what you will about the politics of the Earth Alliance and how things are run, but oh boy, everybody's different on Earth.
I mean, it could just be a difference in the Japanese DE&I policies in the early 2000s versus 2024, but point well taken for sure.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, moving on to my next part here. Blue Cosmos are resident bad guys. They got a beef with coordinators. They're not fans. Now, going back to the process, you're a Blue Cosmos guy, Brian.
Yep.
Okay, for the purposes of this
Sure.
argument. You're reading through the newspaper or the tablet, whatever. Oh boy, I just aged us. You're reading on your app, your news app.
By the way, do you think that Gen Z even knows what newspaper ink smells like?
No, I don't think they know that. They've never had to put quarters into a vending machine. They missed out on so much, Brian.
Yeah. Anyway, carry on.
Okay, so Mr. Blue Cosmos Brian, you're reading on your tablet about this George Glenn guy and everything he says. He says the embryo and the mother's taken out, dropped into a little tub, given the whole editing injections of DNA, picked up out of the tub, put back into the mother, and then they wait for the baby to grow up and get born on its birthday.
Yep.
Which part of this process is the part that makes Blue Cosmos hit the brakes and say, no, no, no? Is it when not even the baby, when the embryo's injected to change its DNA? Is it when the embryo's taken out of the mother, like a like a cake that you have to check if it's done? And then
That's the toothpick part, like the toothpick check?
yeah, you take it out and then you kind of do something to it. You put the sprinkles and the frosting on it. Then you put it back into the oven. Is that the part they say is, oh my God, that's horribly unnatural? Or is it the whole injection part? Is it both? What is it, Brian? Or is it the fact that it's one thing to take it out and then put it back in? You know, maybe there was a medical reason. But it's another thing to like do the designer baby part and just saying, oh, this is how they're going to look. This is, you know, the randomness of it. We're taking that all out. What is it that Blue Cosmos says no?
I don't think they care about the procedure at all. I think what it is,
Okay.
it's the pure idea that they are not natural like them.
Okay.
It's an other fear, a fear of the other.
Yeah.
It's almost like FOMO, you know, like they didn't have the chance to do that, therefore it's not okay.
Huh. I think that's true for some people. Like Azrael, who like, you know, he and like 5 of his friends got like beat up as kids by like a coordinator that was clearly
Sure.
trained in martial arts.
Right, yeah.
But I also feel like some of it must also be just the gene editing part where for a lot of people it's like, no, you take your chances
Right.
and then that's it. Whatever comes out, you know, you can... oh God, we're going so deep into this. Blue Cosmos, I assume, is okay with abortion because you're aborting a natural baby. Maybe some of Blue Cosmos isn't.
Sure.
But I guess what unites Blue Cosmos is the whole gene editing part where no. That's what you can't do. You can't change this batch. Whatever is inside the dad that's going into the mom.
Right.
You just hope for the best. Maybe you pick out a good one, but you
Right.
don't start editing it.
Yeah, I mean, that is worth exploring. I mean, I would say that would be in a novel that's pretty deep in there, but you could have layers of Blue Cosmos, right? Like,
Yeah,
because if there's a problem with the procedure, that sounds like almost a very religious take.
pretty much, yeah.
I could see some people disagreeing with that, but then, yeah, I think what I'm saying is the end of what you said, where they don't like the editing. Like, it's not fair. Because again, not everyone has that opportunity. I think it's even less about fairness and more just about they are different than we are.
Right.
And they're
Okay,
better.
that's-
And they're better, right? It would be one thing if
Well-
they weren't better, but if they are typically better, then that rubs them the wrong way.
I almost want to challenge that though and say that the results clearly show that they're not better.
I agree.
Yeah.
I agree.
Okay, so we're on the same page with that.
Yeah, they're fighting a principled war here, so...
You're clearly being marketed to that you're better, but the results don't really show that at all in these wars.
Yeah, that doesn't fire... I mean, results don't fire people up, right? It's all the stoking
No.
and the fire and brimstone and...
Yeah. At the end of the day, it almost seems like what binds the coordinators together is the fact that they all encountered a hypodermic needle at some point.
Yes.
That's about it. If you come down to the brass tacks, which is not the greatest foundation for a country or a nation, I feel like.
Hey, did you mean to do that pun?
Not really, no.
So that brings me to one of my other mistakes that I think were made. So they didn't visualize the difference between naturals and coordinators enough in the show.
No.
If you're going to pitch us that these are like one person is significantly different than the other so much that they are fighting a war over the other, I should be able to see the difference.
Right.
Like as a viewer. But then you have Kira and Kigali doing that whole spiel that you said, and they're basically saying that we're the same. I feel like that doesn't become anything in the show. Like, that should be the main theme of the show instead of space versus Earth.
Yeah, the sameness gets so apparent, like, when you really think about it. Like, how come a Jin pilot isn't doing cartwheels and flips and just completely outclassing a Wyndham? You
Right.
know, we see the Earth Alliance just routinely take out a Jin. These pilots with their supposed faster senses, better spatial awareness, the results aren't there. There's no difference.
And Isaac, do you think an average fan would remember the conflict between Siegel Klein and Patrick Zala?
No.
Because to me, that should have been the theme of the show.
Yeah, they should have really harped that in. I mean, I would estimate Siegel Klein's appearances in the show, minutes wise, you could count it on one hand.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah, which is disappointing because they really wanted to get to Zala quick, as opposed to showing us, well, there's kind of this alternate interpretation that's much more reasonable for Zaft and the plants, but that doesn't make for good battles, so we're gonna kind of delete that.
It's just, yeah, it's kind of sped over in favor of aggressive military measures, I think.
Yeah, something we didn't hear in the show, but there's a slur against coordinators.
I read that. There was a reference that it was in the show, but I never heard it.
Me neither. I figure, like, best way to kind of, show not tell is if you hear someone throwing that words around, you immediately know they're Blue Cosmos.
Yeah.
It should almost be something Blue Cosmos members can't not use in a sentence. But we almost never hear it. And the term is patchworker, which is a slur for a coordinator due to the patchwork of their DNA. Which, sure.
That's going to go in Gundam Trivia at AX Chibi, everyone. So if you're listening, that's going to be one of the questions.
That's pretty good. That's deep. Okay.
So I didn't know this, Isaac, but also in the Astray manga, there is another failure of the Ultimate Coordinator project that spawned Kira, who survived.
Yeah.
His name is Kennard Pars. That seems like a good plot thread. I feel like Astray is a lot more interesting than Seed Destiny.
Yeah, I mean, after the show was done, they probably had as many questions as we did.
Yeah. The other thing is we haven't mentioned the Accords, which is a subtype of coordinators that were created by Queen Aura. There's only really 8 of them. Spoilers, if you watch Freedom, 7 of them die, and only the last one left is Lacus. They possess extra abilities, various mental abilities like telepathy and manipulation and all this stuff. It's kind of like a not-so-good telepath from U.S. comics, if you're ever used to reading those. But they're kind of limited by distance, Isaac, because they don't have Cerebro in this world. And they lack the seed factor, except for Lacus, which probably because they didn't come up with the idea of the Accords until 20 years later. So, although on the Accords, Isaac, I don't know if you thought of this, it was somewhat unclear to me if Aura knows that she made Lacus and she was friends with Lacus's mother, why didn't she try to go get Lacus back after Lacus's mother died? She kept all the other 7 and she just left Lacus out there with no control over her. I don't buy that.
No, especially with how critical she was to getting with the prime minister, right?
Like, the whole thing doesn't work without Lacus.
Yeah, it was. I don't know. Off the cuff headcanoning would be they still needed their inside guy in the plants, and they still needed to create the Kingdom of Foundation. So for the Destiny plan to be implemented, even if they had Lacus, they wouldn't have the strength to force in the Destiny plan over the whole world and plants. They needed so much still at that point. They needed Kingdom of Foundation. They needed the inside guy in the plant to do the coup. They needed what was left of Requiem. Lacus was such small potatoes compared to bigger things.
So they needed her to ascend to such an important thing that she could then be useful to them. But then, like, if Aura's friends with Durandal, shouldn't they tell Durandal not to kill Lacus? Like, he sent an assassin after Lacus.
I mean, were they really coordinating, not pun intended, at that point? Because
I think so, yeah, because
who
she
knows
instituted
where
the
she
Destiny
was?
plan. Well, I don't know. He helped her become Queen of Foundation.
Mm-hmm.
She developed the Accords to lead the Destiny plan, to implement the Destiny plan. That's what we're led to believe. Yet Durandal's trying to kill Lacus with those assassins. So it just doesn't make sense.
No, it doesn't.
I need clarity.
Oh, dear. No, this is a writing issue where they made stuff up later.
Yeah, it's if someone knows how we can justify this retcon that Durandal was pals with Aura, yet he's trying to assassinate Lacus. And if you know where Lacus's mother is, or more details about her, let me know, because I'm confused.
Not good. Oh, dear. I mean, this is inevitable, though, where you're essentially retconning stuff because you create new content.
It's a danger with retcons, man. You got to be careful with those.
This isn't the same thing, really, but the closest thing I can think of off the top of my head is Universal Century. As time went on, suddenly now there were like dozens of Gundams running around during the 1 Year War.
It also reminds me a lot of Laplace's box, where
Yeah. Oh god.
they really built up Laplace's box, and then like they opened it, and it was kind of like, all right, but like,
It's
I
like, be
guess.
nice to each other. It's like, well, man. Okay, what's next on my list? Oh, George Glenn. Oh boy, I need to pick your brain for this, Brian, because George Glenn saying anyone who works for the betterment of humankind is a coordinator is pretty foolish, right? Because he released the process on how to create a coordinator. Coordinators are genetically different than baseline humankind naturals. And the idea that anybody is a coordinator is foolish because he just explained how to create a coordinator. He's like contradicting himself effectively. Am I right?
I see what you're saying.
Yeah.
I don't think you can compare the George who announced it to the George that said that, because the George that said that was the AI. Was that at the end of his life he had 40 more years of life experience, and I'm sure his worldview shifted.
Okay.
Because that is a much more wiser statement
Yeah.
than perhaps releasing the ability to make coordinators to the public.
It's almost a damage control statement, really. Like, hey, we can all hold hands.
We can all be coordinators. Don't worry
Yeah.
about it.
If we all work together, we can make things better. It's
Do you
like,
think
well,
if he tells that to a Blue Cosmos member, do they get angry? Like, they're like, did you just call me a dirty coordinator?
oh, those are fighting words? That's a good point, yeah. Like, they just pick up a chair and throw it. Okay. From the way things end in Freedom, and I guess Destiny, you yourself, do you think the coordinators are going to slowly die out over the generations? Or are they going to be able to come up with a technological fix to their fertility problems?
I think they will come up with a fix given enough time. However, I just don't think it's even worth doing that, because the opening the borders, so to speak, solution
Yeah.
is so much easier. It takes no effort.
Right.
So I don't even think they'll ever need to do it. I think it'll naturally resolve itself, pun intended, I guess.
Sure, half the world like gets flattened each time there's a war. So I'm sure if you offered people like, look, you can live here,
Right.
We'll give you a house and like a good job. It's pretty mellow.
Right. Yeah.
Unless there's a battle outside the plant.
Right. Exactly.
But like, I think a lot of people would sign up and say, yeah, I'll go for it and give it a try.
I think what it makes me think about is, like, if you think about Freedom, it's 2 years after Destiny, right? Lacuse is in charge.
Feels like 2 months.
Look, it does seem like 2 months.
2 weeks.
Lacuse is in charge. It feels
Sure.
like they should have opened the borders a little bit already.
Well, she also has to deal with like the obvious balancing act of there being a ton of Zala supporters left, as we clearly saw in the coup.
Yeah, that's
So-
true. Although they got cooed right back pretty easily, so I don't know.
Yeah, but I mean, again, this is Zapped, so there's a coup a week later. There's people waiting to coup the uncoup,
Yeah.
just waiting in the wings. So, oh god, even Lacuse is not like secure in power. She has to toe the line. But man, okay, is the fertility problem a clear sign that whatever was done is just, pun or intended or not, so unnatural to keeping reproduction going over generation that it's doomed to failure, and the coordinators are really little more than failed experiments since they can't even really, keep their society reproducing in good numbers?
No, I don't think so. I think it's a sign that they are off track, though, because, again, the original point was that they were supposed to take their improved genes and spread them to the greater population of naturals. It's like they have a blueprint and it's got 5 steps, and they never want to go to step 5. Like, they're on step 4 and they refuse to complete step 5, and they're sitting there like, oh, what's wrong?
It almost feels like to me, like at this point with my notes and stuff, that George Glenn pretty much said, go out and make more George Glenns that can do a lot more research, do like more exploration in space and stuff. Not everybody has to be a George Glenn.
Right.
That's kind of impossible resource-wise and just, time-wise. But if you just make more of us, even one-offs, like they're going to do good things, like find the first alien bones, explore Jupiter, become Olympians, things like that. The point isn't to have like multiple George Glenns just reproducing with each other. It was to create exceptional people that did good things for humanity, essentially
Correct.
like George Glenn did, except for the whole release coordinators and unwittingly create a multiple wars.
He's only one man, Isaac. They need a few more to, push us even further forward.
Brian, George Glenn is the butterfly effect of the cosmic era.
It all hinges on that guy, man.
He made one announcement, and ever since then, that billions of people have died.
That dude is so impressive. I feel like they really undersell his accomplishments, right? Because if you think about any of those things that he did, any one of those is like the top achievement in someone's life of an
Yeah.
exceptional person.
Can I get the list again?
Olympic gold medalist, ace
Mate.
pilot in the Air Force, aerospace
Wow.
engineer, and then he
Okay.
built and designed the spaceship to explore Jupiter.
Which is
I mean, that's
it
incredible. That's by far
yeah.
the best thing he did.
I'm speechless.
So,
And then, of course, probably the only thing that could possibly top that would be becoming the first human being to obtain and bring back
oh yes,
proof of alien life.
Right.
My God, he must be. No one else comes close in science.
which we then never hear of again. But
Yeah,
other than
well,
in background shots.
As you and I know, Brian, based on our headcanon and, well, not even headcanon, but just piecing things together, pun intended. During one of Zaph's many coups, the the fossils were either destroyed or put into a vault for safekeeping, and only a replica is what remains for people to look at.
I'm still looking for an answer on that, people. If anyone knows why all of a sudden it says replica in Freedom, hopefully it's safe, Isaac. Maybe it's in the Smithsonian, sitting in a drawer somewhere.
You know what? I'm pretty Blue Cosmos, but I'm actually going to give the coordinators at Zaph some credit that, like, even during the course of a coup, it's almost a religious object, so no one's really going to shoot that, or blow it up. It was probably more a case of maybe during the coup, it was relocated somewhere safe.
Yeah.
And then after the second coup or whatever, people were like, you know what? Just leave it there.
It's kind of like some famous paintings where you should just never put the real one out.
Oh, yeah. Is that how it is with the Mona Lisa? Like,
No, the Mona Lisa is real, but it's behind some pretty serious hardware.
Are we sure it's real, or we're told it's real?
Well, we're told it's real, but then again, if it's not real, then they don't need the 5-inch thick glass that's around it. So,
well, that's how you sell it, though.
Yeah, that's true,
But you do the security to make everyone think that's the real thing.
Yeah.
When the real one's in, like, a vault surrounded by, like, the French army or something.
Yeah. So I'm still waiting for my sequel where the space whales return for vengeance, and they're led by Lacusa's mother.
Yeah, and then we get oh God, what would be the new term? We'll call them advancers.
It's the Coorcas.
They're cooperators. Oh,
Cooperators.
All right, getting back to my point, I think we're on the same page, really. Why haven't the plants won? How come the naturals can make super weapons that are better than coordinator super weapons? So, results-wise, we both kind of agree that naturals and coordinators, performance-wise, you guys are batting the same averages.
Yeah, I mean, they kind of just stalemate one after the other. It's like those things where you put the fists on top of each other when you're going up the pole. You know what I'm talking about?
Sure.
They just kind of keep doing that until they get to the top, and then everyone has a bad day. But yeah, I don't know that one necessarily has the advantage over the other. Obviously, there are less coordinators by a lot, but they both have very tenuous living arrangements. Like, if you're a natural, you live on Earth in one spot on Earth.
Yeah.
Like, they know where you live. And the same thing with the coordinators. Their plants are super fragile, as we've discussed. So I feel like there's no good way out of this, and I don't understand why they're still fighting, which I feel like that may be a bit of a mistake. A little samey the third time over.
Yeah.
Like, it never ends well, so let's do something different. But then again, in the real world, we have conflicts like that as well, where they just keep repeating, not
Which we
going to
shall
name
not
names.
name.
But
let's just say it's in a little warm part of the world. It's
happening right now.
They go for try number 20.
Yeah, it's still going. And people have strongly held beliefs on both sides. So assume it's the same for this. I just don't know that it's going to end. But as you said, the benefits that are advertised, they don't seem to be materializing quite as fantastically as the claims were.
Boy, you imagine being like a parent of a coordinated kid and like you got the loans, you paid the 6 figures for the procedure, and then
and all Timmy got was some green hair.
They run a little fast, I guess. They're a little stronger. They could do a few extra push-ups. They went to a good college, but so did the kid that bought his way in.
Right.
I mean, what do we pay for?
Yep.
Okay. Brian, I think I know what your answer is going to be, but are coordinators legally considered human beings?
Yes, I believe.
Do you think they're human beings?
Yeah, I don't think they're different enough to be considered a new species. I don't know what the requirement is.
Yeah.
So, in Marvel, for example, mutants are considered Homo superior instead of Homo sapiens.
So subtle.
Yeah. They should have introduced a term like that in here. That would have been a good way to infer the difference.
Yeah.
If someone, I'm sure I could look it up, but maybe one of our biological leaning listeners can let us know what the criteria is to be a new species.
I actually have it here in the U.S.
Oh,
Code at
yeah, what
Cornell
is
Law
it?
School. Okay, 3 paragraphs. Paragraph A. Might get a little dry, but here we go. The words person, human being, child, and individual shall include every infant member of the species Homo sapiens who is born alive at any stage of development. I can see Blue Cosmos already kind of picking a bone with this and saying, the embryo had to be taken out of the mom,
Yeah.
which is not born alive.
There you
They
go.
had to put it into the artificial womb to start injecting it. Then they took it out of the womb. I mean, they took it out of the artificial slime and shoved it back into the mom. So this is not a human being.
Yeah.
Okay, here's part B. The term born alive with respect to a member of species Homo sapien means the complete expulsion or extraction from his or her mother of that member at any stage of development who after such expulsion or extraction breathes or has a beating heart, pulsation of the umbilical cord, or definite movement of voluntary muscles regardless of whether the umbilical cord has been cut, regardless of whether the expulsion or extraction occurs as a result of natural or induced labor, cesarean section, or induced abortion.
Would they argue though that the second time coming out counts?
Yeah, that's true. But then again, like, how can it count? It already happened. I can see Blue Cosmos really.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, here's the last part. Nothing in this section shall be construed to affirm, deny, expand, or contract any legal status or legal right applicable to any member of the species Homo sapiens at any point prior to being born alive as defined in this section. Okay, that mostly sounds like it defeats Blue Cosmos. Again, this is just U.S. law. Who knows what Atlantic Federation's running on in the series.
Yeah.
But the whole born alive part, I can see Blue Cosmos saying, look, it can't live without
Right, yeah.
the slime in the artificial womb when you guys are injecting it.
Yeah.
So this stops being a human being almost at step 1.
Yeah, Azrael's lawyers will be all over that one, so.
Yeah, so I don't know. Would removal of the embryo, putting it into the slime bucket, would that make it not human? I can.
It's definitely not a natural human. I mean,
No, that's not something that really happens in nature, but I can see Blue Cosmos. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but I
Well-
also want to know what it takes to get the scientific, like, what do we have to do? Like, how much genetic modification do you have to do to where Homo sapien is no longer appropriate? We need a biology consultant for this segment.
Okay, coordinators. They've diverted so far from, like, George Glenn's vision that I'm surprised they don't have so much more introspection about, like, what they've become. Because as a society, the plants have fully embraced war. They've built a huge, like, military and industrial complex. They lost a war trying to implement the Destiny Plan, and then just 2 years later, they tried to pick up the Destiny Plan again and did another war. Are they too far gone from George Glenn's kind of hopeful vision of the future?
I mean, it certainly doesn't seem like they're pulling it back anytime soon. I do think what the show should have done to this exact point is someone should have called them out on it and been like, hey, you're so far off target here. Like, what are you doing? You're so far off target that you're no different than the naturals. And that wasn't brought up.
No. Oh, that would have been a good Kira moment, you know? Well, Lacus, I guess.
It would, and I think the show should have done it because I think it would be impactful. Like, overall, I feel like coordinators is one of the best things that Seed has going for it. They just don't use it, I think, to its fullest potential.
No, they need to, like, go into, like, the deep Blade Runner kind of discussion, themes about it, but they don't.
Maybe it's just because you can't work mobile suit combat into it? I don't know.
Okay, if tomorrow it was announced that we now have the technology to pretty much make coordinators, or at least edit in the same way that they're doing, would society react the same way, I guess I should say, with Blue Cosmos showing up? Or a Blue Cosmos would be created in the real world, really?
Oh, I think they would, for sure.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. Humans are... God, we don't even agree. We don't even like each other when we're born naturally.
No, absolutely. We create things for way less offenses than this, so...
Okay. Are coordinators sort of inherently unfair, I guess I should say, because, like, in a society, if coordinators did exist, and I guess they did for a brief window all over the Earth sphere before they had to run to the plants or orb, but, like, say if there's students who are genetically changed to have intelligence, and they get all the scholarships, that possibly can't be fair to the natural students, right?
Oh, 100%. So that's where you would
Yeah.
need certain guardrails. Again, I'll use
Yeah.
that term to be like, well, if you're a coordinator, then yeah, you can have a scholarship, but it can't negatively impact people that by no fault of their own
God.
have not the same ability.
Yeah, that's like some type of affirmative action, coordinator action,
It is,
natural
yeah, for
action
sure. Mm-hmm.
type discussion that had to have happened in the cosmic era. Because it goes further than that, though, because, like, well, what if the coordinators get all the highest paid job? You know,
Right.
what about the
Yeah.
naturals? What if the coordinators can now afford the best houses or live in the best neighborhoods? What about the naturals? Based on this, there must have been a point where there was like peak Blue Cosmos membership.
Maybe they should have shown that, because then you would understand Blue Cosmos's hate a little bit more. But we've never shown any instances where they did take all the jobs or where they did take all the school spots.
Yeah, they must have just never been in the numbers because, yeah, they were so small they had to run to orbit the plants. As much trouble and killing, I think, as there was in the Earth Alliance before the show actually starts, we never really got to a point where, there were like camps for the coordinators,
Right,
at least
yeah.
to our knowledge. We never saw that, so
That would be a very Gundam thing. I'm surprised they didn't do that. That would have been effective.
that would have been very Tamino with how much he really goes into he doesn't like the Axis powers, because who should like them? They were horrible.
It's also one of those things where if I'm an average person who watches a show, if I think big picture, when this show starts, all the coordinators are already living in the plants.
Uh-huh.
They're already in one spot, and everybody just doesn't like each other. There's no intergroup conflict. They're already at odds, and they don't have the chance to have coordinators on Earth that choose a side. They just they side with Earth. I mean, yeah, we have Kira, but that's kind of it, really.
Yeah, the whole half coordinator thing is such a missed opportunity because I can't think of one half coordinator character.
Yeah, not really.
Which would have completely changed the discussion in the show. But we sadly never got that, just as we never got many other answers about coordinators.
Yeah, my overall conclusion is just coordinators are great. I think it's a great alternative to new type. Like, if you sit down and make a Gundam show and you think, I need a new type analog, what am I going to do? Coordinators is a really good idea.
Yeah.
I feel like it has a lot of potential, though, that they didn't use. And they put out 100 episodes in a movie, and I still got a lot of questions, and I still think there's some things they could answer. Maybe it's just not what they want to focus on. I don't know.
Well, at the end of the day, the coordinators and naturals don't really perform that differently. So I guess sort of a maybe hidden message is people are alike, no matter if they've been genetically engineered, if they're born different, if they're born naturally, completely normally. They're both going to kind of want to go to war and also fight for what they believe in and try to protect what they believe in too. That's kind of a hidden message that I see now, looking back after all this research, just how similar in the end the coordinators and the naturals are, regardless of them being in different countries or any type of differences in their birth process. Well, Brian, we did a deep dive, but I feel like we still have a lot of questions that need answers.
After the deep dive, we got out of the pool, and we're still just as confused as when we jumped into the pool.
We got water in our ears. Our fingers look like raisins. And we're like, what did we do?
We talked about some special people, and
someone threw up in the pool.
Yeah, don't throw up in the pool, kids.
Well, that was a deep dive. And now I feel like watching Blade Runner.
Yeah, my takeaways from coordinators are, one, if you like coordinators or the coordinator topic and you've seen Seed, I would probably go read Gundam Seed Astray and all of its spin-offs, because I feel like they really took the coordinator topic head on and like tried to do some stuff that's interesting with it. You can, maybe some of their execution is good or bad, I don't know, I haven't read it, but at least I feel like they tackled the topic head on, which I feel like the main series kind of avoided it.
Yeah.
Or at least the most interesting parts of it. And then two, I agree with Isaac. I've never actually watched Blade Runner, but I have read Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, which is the book that it's based on. Fantastic book. Highly recommend reading the book or watching the film.
All right, listeners, you got homework.
Yeah, go read Do Androids Dream and go watch Blade Runner.
Yeah. And what do you think, listeners?
If you were a coordinator, what would you change about your child?
What would you pick for their height, their hair color, their eye color? What about their potential abilities?
What is going on with Lakusa's mother? Why can't we at least give her a name? Where is she? Do you think she's alive like I do? I feel like that could be a good thing. I don't think we've seen the last of the Cosmic Era, Isaac. Gundam Seed Freedom was so successful. We're gonna get another Cosmic Era project with Kira and Co. And I hope it's a bigger time skip.
You want Kira with a beard.
I don't necessarily. He doesn't necessarily have to have a beard, but I want some substantial changes where we're not just doing Zaf versus Earth Alliance again.
That's exactly what it's going to be. There's going to be plants in space. There's going to be fleet battles. And there's going to be ballroom dancing.
Well, you know what? If Catholic school textbooks have taught me anything, it's that Jesus did have a beard. So that would fit if he grew a beard.
He sure did. This is one final point almost, but is Kira a failure? Because, as I pointed out, the ultimate coordinator isn't exactly doing research that'll help all humanity. He's not exactly exploring the cosmos. Kira is the best pilot of a war machine. That's about it. Is that a failure of the true goals of coordinators, which is to help humankind?
I don't think he's a failure at all. I mean, I think he's doing the best for what's in front of him. It's not like anyone's in front of him being like, hey, I want to sponsor you on a Jupiter, exploration trip, right? Like, that's just not the time that he lives in. The time he lives in is fraught with war, and he's doing his best to solve it and keep everybody alive. So I would not say he's a failure at all. I would say it's a bit ironic that the ultimate coordinator is not being shepherded toward what George Glenn thought the true goal of a coordinator should be, but it's just not the situation that's presented in front of him. At least not yet. Again, he still has plenty of time. He's only like 20-something by freedom, right? So if that, he's not an old man yet. He's got plenty of time to grow that beard, Isaac, and become a hippy-dippy guy that has a philosophical message.
I hope he does eventually. I hope a lot of coordinators eventually go back to the George Glenn path. That would almost make the show very much progress in like how the Cosmic Era can resolve. But we'll see what happens. I don't think it's going to happen. Zaf's going to have a coup. There's going to be a super weapon.
Do you think that would be the most effective way to combat Blue Cosmos? Like, instead of being super aggressive against them, like Zaft always is, what if they were just like, they took a more hippie approach and they were like, hey man, it's cool, just like calm down, like we'll all just live in peace? And
No, as Blue Cosmos is going to kill them no matter what. Right?
Okay, so they're still launching that nuke is what you're saying.
Yeah, not just that, but like, I can see Blue Cosmos chasing them to the ends of the universe. If the setting for the next movie or show is, the plants strap some engines to them and they decided to take off into space, you can guarantee that the Earth Alliance is sending some deep space fleet after them with nukes.
Well, just don't even send the fleet, just send the nukes. It's even cheaper. All right, listeners, let us know your thoughts on coordinators, any of your questions. Give us your designer baby coordinator specs, and let us know if you have any comments on any of our questions. Isaac.
All right, listeners, before you go to sleep tonight, stand next to your bed. Get on your knees, put your hands together, look up at the ceiling, and hail Blue Cosmos.
Good night, everybody.